The pure glass that asked for a stone. On the necessity of being broken. A glass was made so pure that no flaw could be seen in it. The maker had been a famous glassblower of a far country. He had spent his last years perfecting a single technique, a way of working the molten glass that removed, with great care, every small irregularity, every tiny bubble, every minor distortion that ordinary glass contained. He had practiced on perhaps 1,000 failed attempts. The glass had been his last work. He had finished it in his 80th year on a winter evening and had died shortly after in his bed satisfied. The glass was a wine glass. It was tall, narrow at the base, wide at the bowl, with a thin stem. It had been polished after the blowing by a process the maker had also invented. Its walls were so clear that you could not see them. You could see the air on the other side of them as if no glass were in the way. You could see, when you held it to the light, only the very faint outline of the rim and the base. It sat on the highest shelf in the cabinet of a wealthy merchant who had bought it at auction. The maker had been proud in his last weeks of having made it. The owner, when he had received it, had been afraid. The glass was too perfect to drink from. If you put wine in it, you could not see the wine. The wine appeared to be hovering in the air in the rough shape of a glass, with no container around it. If you tilted it, you could not be sure you had tilted it. If you set it down, you had to be certain of the position, because once your hand left it, it was almost impossible to locate it again on a flat surface. It became, in the household, an object of pure admiration, used for nothing. The merchant brought guests to see it. The guests admired it. They were not, however, given wine in it. The merchant served them, when they came to drink, in ordinary cut crystal glasses, of which he had a fine set. The glass remained on the high shelf. This continued for 100 years. The merchant died. His son inherited the house, the cabinet, the glass. The son was, by his own account, a less interesting man than his father had been. He had not in his own life particularly understood the glass, but he had inherited the family's pride in it. He had brought his own guests to see it. He had not in his own household put wine in it. The son died. His grandson inherited. The grandson married. The wife came into the household. She was a thoughtful woman who, on first seeing the glass, had asked her husband why no one drank from it. He had explained, somewhat vaguely, that it was too perfect to use. She had not pressed. The glass in those 100 years sat on the high shelf. The glass wept on its shelf, though no one heard. This was, in some sense, the first development of its inner life. The glass had not, in its first years, wept. It had been content, in its first decades, to be admired. The admiration had been, in some way, what it had been made for. It had been the maker's intention, after all. The glass had honored the intention. But by the 70th year, the admiration had begun to feel insufficient. The glass had observed, from its high shelf, the ordinary cut crystal glasses in use below. It had observed them being held to lips. It had observed them holding wine of various colors, which moved within them, which moved in their bodies as the drinker tilted them. It had observed them being washed, after the meal, with warm water and small soft cloths. It had observed the wash water beading on their surfaces. It had observed them being kissed, occasionally, by drinkers in their cups. The glass had not in its 100 years been kissed. The glass had not been touched by a lip. The glass had not held a wine. The glass had not been washed. It was only dusted very carefully with a small feather duster by a servant who was paid extra for the care required. The glass spoke, on a winter evening, in the center of its 100th year, to the empty room. "I am too perfect to be used," it said. "I have never touched a lip. I have never held a wine. I have been admired for 100 years and have known nothing. I am, I think, almost ready to be broken. I would prefer to be broken now. I would prefer not to wait another century. I cannot, by my own action, fall from the shelf. The shelf is stable. The cabinet is well built. I require, for my breaking, a child or a careless servant or a small earthquake. I have been waiting for one of these for some decades." The room did not in that evening answer. But the glass had spoken, and the speaking had, in some sense, set things in motion. In the 103rd year, A child climbed on a chair one afternoon to reach an apple. The child was the grandson's daughter, perhaps 5 years old. She had been told not to climb on the chair. She had been told that the cabinet was not for children. She had been a quiet child, on the whole obedient, but she had that afternoon wanted the apple, which was in a bowl on the high shelf beside the glass, and she had decided that the rule against climbing was, in this case, less important than the apple. She climbed. She reached for the apple. She knocked the cabinet. The cabinet rocked. The glass, which had been sitting on its high shelf for 103 years, slid an inch toward the edge. The child froze. She had not, in her 5 years, ever heard the rule about the glass. She did not know what was about to happen. She only knew that something in the cabinet was moving and that she had caused it. The glass slid further. It fell. It struck the stone floor. It broke into 7 pieces. The child began to cry. She climbed down from the chair. She ran from the room. She hid under the kitchen table for several hours before her mother found her. The next morning, the kitchen maid sweeping the floor stopped. She was, by some good fortune, a different kind of maid than the household had had in the past. She was a young woman of perhaps 18 who had been hired in the previous month. She had not been told about the glass. She had not been informed of its 103 years on the high shelf. She had only been told to sweep. She stopped because she had noticed something unusual on the floor. She picked up the pieces. They were not shards. They were, on close inspection, small cups. 7 small cups. Each had a clean rim where the break had occurred, clean, in fact, in the way the glass's original rim had been clean, with no roughness. Each had a small base, formed naturally by the way the glass had broken. Each had a hollow in the middle, suitable for holding a small amount of liquid. They were, on inspection, not 7 shards of a broken glass. They were 7 small drinking cups. "How did you become these?" she asked the cups. She had not, in her months of service, addressed any object directly. She had been raised in a village where one occasionally spoke to objects, particularly to bread and to fires. She had been raised, however, to mostly do so privately. The cups, in this case, seemed to call for direct address. "I had to become several," said the cups. "To become any of you. Whole, I was an idea. Broken, I am a kitchen. I am sorry to have taken so long." The maid sat down on the floor with the cups. "How did you know," she said, "to break into useful pieces?" "I had been preparing," said the cups. "I had been waiting for the breaking for some decades. I had been, in those decades, considering in some inner way how I would arrange myself when the breaking came. I had decided somewhere around the 85th year that I would prefer not to be shards. I would prefer to be useful. The breaking, when it came, would be my one opportunity to choose. I chose to be 7. Why 7? The household has 7 people. The grandson, the wife, the daughter who knocked me, the grandson's son, the cook, you, and the night porter. Each will have a cup. I have, in the breaking, distributed myself." The maid stood up. She washed the cups in warm water. She dried them with a small soft cloth. The cups did not, in the washing, break further. They were in their pieces sturdier than the whole glass had been. The break somehow had reinforced their structure. She brought them to the grandson at breakfast. The grandson, who had been told about the breaking by his daughter in tears the previous evening, was prepared to grieve. The glass had been the household's most valuable possession. The breaking would, by all the rules of the family, require a serious punishment for the daughter and a serious mourning by the household. But the maid set the 7 cups on the breakfast table, and the family looked at them, and the family understood somehow that no punishment was required and no mourning was necessary. The glass had become, in the breaking, what it had always wanted to be. The maid drank her morning water from one of the cups. The water tasted clean. It tasted, in fact, of a kind of cleanness she had not encountered before. The glass, in its 103 years of waiting, had absorbed, somehow, a particular quality of patience. The water, on passing through the cup, took on that quality. She used the other 6 for the rest of the household. They lasted another 100 years. The daughter who had knocked the cabinet grew up. She became, in her own time, the grandson's heir. She inherited the 7 cups. She used them in her own household. She did not ever replace them with new glasses. She had learned from her mother and the maid that the cups were the family's true inheritance. The cups passed in the family for another 5 generations. They are in some province still in use. There are by now only 3 of them. 4 have been lost over the centuries, broken further, or carried away by departing servants, or simply mislaid. The remaining 3 are kept in a kitchen drawer. They are used every day for drinking water. The family that owns them does not know they were once a single glass on a high shelf. They know only that the water from these particular cups tastes, somehow, better than the water from other cups. It does. The patience, in some province, is still there. The pure thing on the high shelf has touched. Nothing to touch anything, it must fall. To be used, it must be several. The stone is not your enemy. The stone is the beginning of your usefulness. The glass, before the breaking, was an idea. The cups, after the breaking, are a kitchen. The 103 years of waiting are the preparation for choosing how to arrange yourself when the breaking comes. Most break into shards. The few who have been considering, in some inner way, break into cups.